CBAM has been introduced not just to decarbonize or penalize or take taxes out of the industries or the countries of origin, but to simply decarbonize the entire supply chain.
Right. I can't emphasize enough how ill-prepared our MSMEs are in general to any sort of change. The compliance burden of any change is huge.
And also, what about the double tax? I mean, that is something I think that we need to understand, because if the companies that are anyway not having the capabilities to really go for that green transition and everything, I mean, and if then you tell them that you have to listen now, pay double tax, they will say, "Bhai, hamari dukaan band kar do," right?
Well, so the investments themselves have been growing, but as a percentage of GDP, it's been falling, which means that it's not growing fast enough.
Yeah. In the fiscal year 2023-2024, trade relations between India and the European Union achieved remarkable progress. The exchange of goods alone amounted to about $138 billion, while services trade added approximately another $52 billion. Therefore, the total trade volume has been a substantive $190 billion. Significantly, 2022 has marked the revival of a long-stalled negotiation on Free Trade Agreement, or the FTA, between the two sides. A timely and successful conclusion of this agreement is expected to serve as a transformative milestone that can strengthen the already impressive economic relationship further. The revised discussions on the FTA are now segmented into three interlinked verticals: an FTA in goods and services, a bilateral investment treaty, and a separate treaty on geographical indicators. And there comes a problem: the non-starter, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or the CBAM, which is a legal instrument under the EU climate law, and that requires to cut the emissions by 55% by preventing carbon leakage, as envisaged in their Fit for 55 plan. So on the one hand, it sounds great for a cleaner future for ourselves and our children, and yet it remains politicized and has earned an unfavorable disposition in Indian circles. Why? This is the subject we analyze today on The Print Worldview with Swasti. Without further ado, let's take a deep dive into a much discussed but less understood aspect of how sustainability agenda of the developed West intersects the trade aspirations of the developing world. Which industries are at risk, and how should the Indian business community respond to it? Let me at the outset flag a common misperception. CBAM is going to partly apply from 1st January 2026 to all EU international trade, regardless of whether the EU-India FTA happens or not. So, this isn't just about the FTA. This is about the fundamentals of India's largest trading relationship. Now, with that, let me open the discussion, and we have two very important people to discuss it. I think not just important, but also the right people to discuss it with. As you can see, we have Dr. Manu Bharadwaj. He is the founder and CEO of Climatability, which is a sustainability and decarbonization advisory firm, and he's also a research fellow with the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. Now, what makes Dr. Manu Bharadwaj just the right guest for today's discussion is that he recently got his PhD from the Washington College in America, and his entire PhD is on CBAM and how it impacts the developing countries, especially India. What I think is also noteworthy, Manoj, for the guests to know, is that his PhD and his research was also funded by the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So that's how you know that he's just the right person. Please keep a tab on his book. It's going to be out, and it's going to very soon. I think it's going to be published by Springer. So we'll keep a tab on that. But Manoj, glad to have you on the show and looking forward to speaking to you.
Thanks for having me, Dr.
On the other side, of course, is somebody you know very well, and you see very often. He is, Sharat, TCA Sharat Ragan, who is the in-house expert for all things related to economy for The Print. So, Sharat, very glad to have you here. It's a short introduction, but I think you need no.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Right. So, with this, let me now, just start to deep dive into this entire thing. First thing, Manoj, what is CBAM and why is it so controversial?
Absolutely. CBAM, as we know, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is a policy tool that has been created by EU as a part of the Green Deal, EU Green Deal, and because EU is it's a well-known fact that it's a leader in sustainability, and it's also leading its decarbonization of its industries across the member countries. So, as a part of EU Green Deal, and to go net zero in the nearby years, EU has come up with this Green Deal, and CBAM is one of the most important aspect policy tool of that. Now, CBAM in a fair world is a very interesting and important policy tool, because it directly targets carbon leakage, which is happening because of uh, industries reaching out or settling up their plants in countries with less restrictive carbon emission policies. Now, if we just see in the fair world, it's very easy and fine to understand, but it also has an intricate relationship with international trade, which is a important aspect when it comes to GDP, economy, and industrial growth and economic growth. So, CBAM is very important right now, and especially for a country like India, which has a very interesting position. Like, we are the world's biggest populated country, where we have various plans like poverty alleviation, economic growth, industrial growth. But at the same time, and unfortunately, we are one of the most like biggest polluting nations on the earth. And but again, one more interesting fact: we are our per capita emissions are the least in the world. So it creates a very interesting positions for countries like India and trading partners like EU, to how navigate through these policy tools, which are posing a lot of real life challenges and in terms of impacting economies.
Right. So that's very interesting. So basically, what we understand is that although CBAM sounds like the perfect thing, like in a very fair world, if in an ideal world, Sharad, if we could call that, so in an ideal world, it is a very, very fair thing. It's like a global common. You see that happening a lot of times, especially when we talk about India's trade policies. I mean, recently there was this, this entire thing about, and I wrote about my previous column was on that as well. That you see somebody like Donald Trump coming, and so many people that are nominated in his cabinet, like his commerce secretary or whoever, being so vocal about India being the tariff king, India's, the GSP status being revoked for India and has not been able to get reinstated, even though the US is right now probably the second largest trading partner after the EU. And EU is a bloc. So when you break down trade with respective member states, it's a different thing. But we are looking at EU as a bloc, and of course, that trade is monumental. It's about 190 billion worth of dollars. So very quickly, now, when we say that we live in an unfair world, okay, we say that India would like to have when it is exporting, the tariffs as low as possible,
Right.
but when it is importing, tariffs as high as possible. So, and that refers to as protectionism. That's the
Yes.
first one to you. And a related question with that would be, how does that shape our approach to CBAM?
So I think in all of this, we need to not look at India as in isolation.
Yeah.
It is going to have to be in this China plus one world, because the thing is, there are a lot of opportunities being created now. If the US is saying that our tariffs are very high,
Yeah.
then sure, just to cater to the US, we can reduce the tariffs. But that also means that unless we do like a singular deal with the US, our tariffs across the board will go down, which means we'll get flooded from China with a lot of goods from there. Overcapacity in China is an issue that the
Yeah.
world is facing.
Yeah.
So all of those will come here. Now the thing is that that might be problematic, but on the other hand, if we keep our if we say increase tariffs on China, then a lot of our MSMEs here, which are dependent on Chinese imports
Yeah.
for a lot of their own exports, or the catering to the domestic market, that gets impacted. So how we play this tariff game is, it's going to be very delicate, and
Yeah.
we're going to have to negotiate very hard, because we cannot cut our tariffs down very much from what Donald Trump is saying is problematic.
Yeah.
Because we open ourselves to other risks. So this is an issue. But that said, as you said, the trading with the EU, trading with other developed countries is only going to grow for India, because they're all looking at this China plus one model. They don't want all their eggs in that one basket.
Right.
They want to diversify, and that's a huge opportunity for us. And we're pretty well positioned to leverage it. We haven't yet. There are a lot of things that we can do still to leverage it, but we need to get on board with a lot of these things that the developed countries are, I wouldn't say pushing on us. This is for the world that they're doing it, but we need to get on board with it. Resisting it just for the sake of resisting it and using, all kinds of wrong information, wrong ideas to resist it, I think is not going to work.
But then also then coming back to the fact that, I mean, we all completely understand that, for India, for a developing country such as India, right, protectionism is also a way of sort of protecting our own markets, which will not be as competitive if we were to open it. And then you also mentioned this entire phenomena of how China is going to like absolutely flood our markets. What is it that in India that we really fear about the CBAM?
The thing is that we feel that it's unfair. Just
Yeah.
to put it plainly, we are not the historical polluters. We are right now in the middle, or in the beginning middle of our rapid growth journey.
Okay.
We need all the resources we can get. And unfortunately, renewable energy is not at that level where these high energy sectors like steel, aluminium, that they can rely on renewable energy. Not just yet. We need coal for that.
Yeah.
And we need coal to drive a lot of our growth. About I think about 46% of our energy consumption right now is coal based.
Yeah.
And that's going down, but it's still going to be gradual. And so to penalize us
Yeah.
for this dependence after the developed countries have done everything that they can, they've grown as much as they need to, they are rich countries, and now they're talking about climate change. And yes, climate change is a very urgent issue, but there needs to be a graded level of responsibility across countries. It can't
Right.
be just as Dr. Bharadwaj mentioned, we might be the largest polluters in toto,
Yeah.
but on a per capita level, we're not. We're the lowest.
But that's because we are 1.4 billion anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So very quickly, so I think what we now understand is that there is a lot of justification when it comes to why there is this inhibition in India when it comes to a policy like the CBAM. But I think a part of it, Manoj, and with that I'm going to come to you, is that a part of it is also stemming from the fact that we really have not had an in-depth and an analytical understanding of what the CBAM is all about. So, for example, like Sharat says, and which kind of echoes the general perception, is that it's unfair. The question that I want to come to you with is that how far do you think that the CBAM is unfair?
Absolutely. Building on what Sharat said, I just want to say we should not miss the train, because right now it's the time for India to catch the train and become a partner with the bigger economies of the world to drive the economic growth in India. Uh, Coming to like how unfair CBAM is, like when I started writing my dissertation, I also thought like CBAM is totally unfair and there are no opportunities and gains that can come out of CBAM and like partnering with EU specifically on in these issues. But CBAM can create a lot of opportunities, and that's why in-depth research discussions are very much important for this kind of issue, not only on just on the government and policymaker side, but also academia and think tanks should, and also media should also talk about it and what we are doing right now. EU has recently negotiated successfully the FTA with Mercosur countries, and
I'll just stop you there. You know what the Mercosur countries are? The Mercosur countries is a group of 4 developing countries from South America. They include Argentina, Brazil, and by the way, Brazil is also a BRICS member, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And this particular Mercosur deal, which is with the EU, it creates a kind of an FTA for about 700 million people. And this has also been under negotiation for many years, I guess 20 years or plus. Okay, and they have just concluded it, and that's what he was referring to. Yeah, back to you.
And the most important chapter of that particular deal was of that FTA is the trade and sustainable development chapters, under which one of the components negotiated was CBAM. And if a country like Brazil, which has like a similar economic situation, not same but similar economic situation like India, and it's also BRICS members.
Yeah.
If that country can navigate like an FTA with EU, I think there is an option for us to also talk about it and navigate it. But again, it's very important to understand what are the opportunities, and I have talked about in my book that what opportunities can come out of CBAM. Very quickly, I just want to say that a lot of research which has happened since the beginning. I think this concept started, like the research started way back in 2000s, almost 23 years ago, and no one talked about actually from the clamped finance perspective. Everyone is talking about how protectionist the measure is and how this measure is CBAM is against the climate justice, CBDR, RC policies. But we need to look at different angles, because trade is very important. When there is trade surplus, your economy grows. So you cannot halt trade just because of one sustainability requirement. So we need to discuss about it. So that's my point.
And I think it's also, I think we've reached a point where it needs to be made clear to a lot of people. In fact, I was myself quite intrigued when I got into the details of it, which was that when we talk about, often there is a tendency for two kinds of misinformation when it comes to something like this. A is that it's something that the developed countries are imposing on the developing countries, and then it becomes a very, that kind of an unfair practice.
And loaded.
Yeah, and a loaded statement.
Yeah.
But I think if you sort of deconstruct that statement, you also realize is that once it comes into effect fully, which is from the 1st of January 2026, so it's not yet into effect, as I told you in my introductory part, it is going to apply equally to whether the trading partner is the US or Japan. And by the way, EU and Japan have the world's most comprehensive free trade agreement, and we can talk about it at some other point. So whether it's Japan, whether it's the Mercosur bloc, whether it's India, whether it's ASEAN, or whoever that is, whether it's a developed or a developing country. So that first thing needs to be understood, that it's not a developed versus developing country debate only, and there are more layers. That's one. The second thing is that an important thing is that the CBAM is not necessarily an enabling condition for the FTA, because often it is said that one of the problems why the EU-India FTA cannot be negotiated is because there is a non-starter like CBAM.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that FTA or no FTA, from the 1st of January 2026, if you look at the data, and on the screen you can see some graphs of what really are we importing and exporting from the EU, which is under the CBAM regulations, will have to pay that CBAM tax, right? Regardless of whether we are able to have an FTA or not have an FTA. So then the question then to you, Sharad, is that what do you think? Do you think it makes more sense for us to first push the bilateral investment treaty, or try and also do an FTA? Because like we just mentioned, that the CBAM is going to apply whether you have an FTA or not an FTA. Maybe you have an FTA, you're able to get more investments from the EU, because recently India was also been successful in March of 2024 when we signed an FTA, our first FTA with the advanced economies, with the non-EU countries, the 4 non-EU countries, the
EFTA.
EFTA.
Yeah.
EFTA, and those are Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. But anyway, coming back, so what do you think is a better way to look at it? Because whether we like it or we don't, if we want to do the trade, we have to go for CBAM, isn't it?
I completely agree with both
Yeah.
you and what Dr. Bharadwaj is saying. This is
Yeah.
a train that we cannot let it go too far ahead before we leap onto it. We need to jump onto it very quickly. And the thing with CBAM is that a lot of what we find onerous about it,
Yeah.
things like the rules of origin, the specifications that we need to, throughout the supply chain, we need to specify that each element is not a polluting one, and we need to establish all of that. In any case, we're going to have to do these, we're going to have to bite the bullet on this, because even things like, say, the US, the tariffs that it has imposed on China, and the blocking of imports from China on various goods
Yeah.
from various provinces, the rules say that it's not as if those goods can come to India and then we can process them and we can send them to the US.
That's how we're preventing the carbon leakage. I mean, that's the whole argument of,
Exactly.
it's, you can't just change the origin and just escape, these kind of issues. And that's why we will come later to what is then carbon credits, etc.
Yeah.
But first, I wanted to also to understand from you, so that it ultimately then it is about, about India's investment ecosystem, because
Right.
the question then is that we should try and get more technology, we should upgrade our technology. Can we really do it without the right kind of investments? So also this related question of, why do you think getting investments to India has been so complex? Because it's been falling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the investments themselves have been growing,
Yeah.
but as a percentage of GDP, it's been falling, which means that it's not growing fast enough.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, none of these are new reasons. These are things that have plagued India for the last 30, 40 years. One is land. The fact that land regulations are mostly at the state level, and not all states have uniform regulations on this, it becomes very tough to acquire land at the scale that is required. The bureaucracy gets in, and it's very sad to say that even now, bribery, corruption, all of these things, if you speak to business people,
Yeah.
off the record, this is all they say, that the bureaucracy just tries to take as much from you as they possibly can, and they'll stall your any sort of approvals that you need, environment or anything, until you pay a bribe. And that's one reason. The other reason is that we simply haven't been able to scale. And I mean, it's a related thing. The only way we can be competitive in this China plus one world, and why countries like Vietnam and all are cornering that opportunity,
Yeah.
is because they're being able to scale their factories to levels that India just hasn't been able to manage. And this again comes down to land, because now you can say that scaling up is just a matter of, that would be a brownfield investment. That is just, you're taking a unit of say 10 and you're making it 20. But no, what India needs to do is take it from 10 to 100, which is in essence creating a whole new plant. It's not simply taking an existing plant and making it bigger. So all of this requires clearances, fast tracking of land acquisition, all of that. A lot of the South Indian states are doing quite well in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a
But
single window solution, I would say.
correct, exactly. We
Okay.
need that, and we need it urgently. But there doesn't seem to be any urgency on the government's part or the state government's part. I won't put this only on the center. A
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with the state governments, and while they vie with each other on investment summits and, oh look, we're attracting all of this investment,
Yeah, but the
it's all
investments don't come.
actually, one, they don't come, and it's all really small change if
Yeah.
we want to be competitive at a global level.
True. So, I mean, that's quite true, because I mean, if you really look at what has the China plus one diversification brought, especially after COVID and resilience of supply chains became such an important thing, and then Russia-Ukraine war also happened. I think the only real success story that we have seen is Apple.
Right.
And we have not really seen the investments, especially from the European Union, that are not going to China, are actually not coming to India either. And that is the discussion that we are having about why the investment ecosystem remains so complicated, in India. But very quickly, I want to now understand from Manoj is that there is a third thing in CBAM which is considered to be very complex, and often it is not really brought out in these discussions. One is that, does CBAM apply to all kinds of Indian exports, or only specific ones? And if we are talking about specific ones, then how does the big Indian business and the MSMEs differ? So that's the one thing to you. And the related other thing to you is that, if in India we have a domestic carbon regulation, and if we are already paying, if I as an industry am paying some tax for it, and then I have to pay another tax for CBAM, so does it mean to say that we are actually paying a double tax, or is the reality different? Manoj, you are the right person to answer.
See, the misinformation about CBAM is which is going around prominently, is that CBAM would be levied on all the imports to EU, and irrespective of the goods that CBAM actually is levying the taxes on. So they are the sectors are cement, fertilizers, hydrogen, electricity,
Iron and
and steel. So these are the 5 to 6 sectors which CBAM is going to cover, nothing else. And again, as Dr. Rao said, like, it's not just developing and developed, it's for all the countries that are going to partner and trade with EU. Now, talking about the big industries has the way, the means, the platforms
You
to,
mean in India?
in India, to
Okay.
comply with the CBAM, and it's going to be a reality. We have to understand this. This is going to be a reality from January 2026, and big industries has those platforms to actually cater to it, and if they really want to do the trade, and if they will do it for sure. But now, when we see CBAM, like the concept of CBAM has been introduced not just to decarbonize or penalize, or like take taxes out of the industries or the countries of origin, but to simply decarbonize the entire supply chain.
Right.
And as a part of supply chain, Indian MSMEs play a very important role,
Okay.
and they don't have the means, technology, the knowledge, the capacity to understand and even to decarbonize themselves.
Okay.
And a lot has been going on. The government of India has come up with a project known as RAMP. So it's a joint program of Indian government and the World Bank Group, around $800 million,
Okay.
and which is to support MSMEs. And one of the key themes of supporting MSMEs is to decarbonize, is to go green. So there is an intent from the government of India, from the regulators, but simply it's very difficult to reach out like the huge number of MSMEs we have in India. So we need policy dialogues, we need support facilities for MSMEs to understand them. Otherwise, CBAM, like the main reason of implementing CBAM is to stop carbon leakage, which will not happen and it will be of no use. So this is for EU to understand that we need to reach out to MSMEs, and which has been done. Like one of the key stakeholders visited India uh, earlier this year and had a meeting, and he in his uh, discussion with the Minister of Commerce has also mentioned about that we should reach out to MSMEs. So they are not very well prepared right now, and the focus is very much needed.
No, and this is
And then what about, and also what about the double tax? I mean, that is
right.
something I think that we need to understand, because if the companies that are anyway not having the capabilities to really go for that green transition and everything, I mean, and if then you tell them that you have to listen now, pay double tax, they will say, "Bhai, hamari dukaan band kar do," right? So
Absolutely.
how do you then sell this? There seems to be a communication. Either there is a communication gap or something which is not understood well, because this is just so counterintuitive.
Absolutely. So it would be unfair to say that the Indian side is not doing and it's not leading the decarbonization dialogue. The Indian government has recently come up with the CCTS, which is the carbon credit trading scheme,
Right.
which is almost similar to the cap and trade scheme we have in other countries like EU as a ETS.
Yeah.
So what CCTS is trying to do, and what the Indian policymakers and the government is trying to negotiate with EU and other trading partners, that if a CBAM kind of thing is going to be in motion, we are having a domestic policy which already cap and allow the trading of this carbon inside a country, which actually I would say uh,
You can offset.
offset exactly the which can actually offset what EU is wanting through CBAM. So if it's happening right now, and it's very important for India to create this policy so robustly that EU is already is ready to accept it, because if India, because see, cap and trading scheme is always good for internal carbon trading and carbon markets, which helps industries to decarbonize and provide green incentives to initiate projects for green transition. But at the same time, if you are not negotiating with your partners to recognize that kind of trading schemes, then it will be again a very big problem for Indian industries and will create double taxation sort of thing, which actually CBAM is a double taxation, which is already happening, because if we do cross-border trade, there are tariffs already in place. So one of the reasons of criticizing CBAM is that this is a double taxation on the already prevailing tariffs.
Right. So if I understand correctly, the logic is, I mean, ideally, if this is to be pushed in a seamless way where communication is healthy, the idea is that if India has a CCTS and if I, as an Indian industry, am paying certain amount of tax, let's say X amount to my country's regulations, and then if I'm also importing, then whatever tax the EU tells me to pay will be, and my already paid tax is going to be deducted from what I have to finally pay to the EU.
Absolutely.
And if I have paid more, is there a provision where we can sort of, I mean, we can
Will you
balance
get
that out? I mean, just
credits?
imagine.
So it's
Yeah.
it's about credits.
So,
If
so
we, yeah.
ultimately, and that is what I wanted to come to, because that brings us to the concept of carbon credits, which is probably the end state of how we are looking at decarbonizing the supply chain. So now, open question to both of you: what are carbon credits, and how should India, as this developing economy with very huge aspirations and all these complexities that we talked about, should look at carbon credits? Yes,
Let's Dr.
Manoj.
Bhardwaj take
Okay,
Absolutely.
this.
yes, fine.
For me, carbon credits have been a very amazing and interesting concept. While I was pursuing my PhD, I had an opportunity of working with a law firm in the United States, which has developed a project, carbon trading project, actually in India, in the Panna region of Madhya Pradesh, and it's a $30 million project. And I've learned a lot from that particular project. I've been doing the legal and policy side of it, how to navigate it, and how to create and get it certified from Vera or gold standards, because these are the bodies that verify your project. So carbon credits are nothing but, simply put, it's the allowance that you get to pollute or like to offset your carbon emissions. Like for example, if you are creating a social CSR project where you are providing a lot of help to, I would say, for example, a ARR project, which is afforestation, regeneration, revegetation project. So what ARR project will do, a authority like Vera or Gold Standard or any other authority which has the power to verify that project, they will verify a project. They will say that this project in these 4 to 5 or 6 years will create n number of carbon credits, which can be now sold to other industries which need to emit more carbon to meet their trading needs and all that stuff. So it's like offsetting scheme which can help out. And again, carbon credits has been criticized by a lot of civil society organization, especially at COP, because it gives an allowance to emit more carbon. But at the same time, now the most
So it's a
important,
rerouting of how much can you pollute,
exactly,
right?
but
Yeah.
a lot of people, those who miss the concept or understanding, is the finance, from where the finance will come, from where the investments will come. Sadly, the developed world, the developed bloc, has failed to comply with their green investments or the climate funds they have been agreeing to in different COPs at UNFCCC COPs. So now the question is from where the funds will come. So carbon credits provide the funds to drive those green investment, to drive those green jobs, and all the overall the energy transition, the green energy transition. So they are very important and much needed.
What are your thoughts then, Sharat, listening to this? What are your thoughts? I mean, how should we in India, or the industries, we as an economy should perceive this entire thing? Because the very fact that we in India also have a CCTS means that we are sensitive to it. The question is, are the industries ready? And if the industries are not ready, how can we sort of drive this investment route in a way that things start falling in place? Because we all realize it's a work in progress, but there's no getting away from it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough how ill-prepared our MSMEs are in general to any sort of change. The
Right.
compliance burden of any change is huge. Just even take the example of GST in 2017 when it came in. Just getting the MSMEs onto the GST platform and registered and all
Yeah.
of that was such a huge pain point for them,
Yeah.
that they still talk about it and the issues still persist. And so to get them onto this newer system on using green technologies and to report it and the rules of origin and all of that is going to be painful. And why I use GST as an example is because now you have a ready-made database of your MSMEs. You
Okay.
can, in a very targeted way, you can go and help them get complied with all of these rules, because it's not as if you can sit back and wait for them to come, okay, sir, please help us do this. You can actively go and say
Yeah.
that here we have your GST number. It looks like you are exporting to the EU or to any other developed country.
Right.
Here we are to help you. Here's the platform. This is what we
Yeah.
can do.
And we have a ministry of the MSMEs, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a
And
lot
now
of
we've
data
got
curated there.
budget 2025 coming up on Feb 1st.
Yeah.
This would be a great scheme for them to announce that it's an absolutely targeted scheme using GST data to go and target these MSMEs. And now to attract investment, of course, that's a bigger problem, because our capacity utilization as measured by the RBI
Yeah.
has been at around 75% for the last 4, 5, maybe 8 quarters, 9 quarters. Like, so that's 2.5 years or so. They've been using their factories at that 75% level, which means either that they're becoming much more efficient, like demand is increasing and becoming much more efficient in using their existing capacity, which I don't think is likely. I think just demand is not enough for them to think about investing more.
Right.
And our export scenario as well, because of the geopolitical tensions, the Red Sea crisis persisting, all of that, the export demand is not growing as we want. So again, they aren't going to invest because of that. So we have to make it very, very attractive for them to come and invest. And it comes down to those things. We'll make it cheap for you to buy land,
Yeah.
or at least easy for you to buy land.
Yeah.
The labor regulations, now the center has it's passed these labor codes,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not being notified by either the center or the states. The states haven't
Important
taken
point.
it.
Yeah.
So all of this, there needs to be cooperation at the central and state levels. The center, the BJP has so many states under its own control,
Yeah.
but it's not being able to even leverage that to get any sort of movement on the ground in terms of land and labor reform. So these are all big glaring gaps that have persisted for a long time. I won't even say that it's this government's fault. It's
Oh,
the
absolutely.
UPA's fault. It's the Vajpayee government's fault. It's all the way back in time. They have not been able to fix this issue.
What we have today is a result of these structural impediments,
Yeah.
and not something which has come with the governments or gone away with the other governments. These are structural issues that sort of we can take a look back over the last 30, 40, 50 years that things have not changed. And I probably would sort of give it to the current dispensation, because they really did try bringing about the agricultural reforms and the labor reforms, but we all saw the kind of backlash then
Yeah,
that happened.
absolutely.
What is the way forward, Manoj? Of course, we all understand the complexity. Of course, we understand that we are standing at different rungs of that ladder. So we are not all equidistant from that objective, right? And India has been a champion of that, right? It's not just for India, but India has stood for the causes of the global south and developing countries when it comes to these kind of common but differentiated responsibilities and different capabilities as well.
Sure. Building upon what Sharat said, like two of the solutions that I would quickly like to mention uh, is the ISDS system needs to go strengthened, which is investor state dispute settlement. India, unfortunately, is lagging behind in that we are not part of ICSID, which is the World Bank's investor dispute settlement mechanism or branch, I would say. And then the investor state arbitration is very bad in India, and we have to go to other countries, and we talk about making Indian arbitration hub, which is important for these investment related issues, which is not happening. And coming back to our sustainability related issue, sustainability reportings in terms of ESG reportings can attract a lot of investment. Now all the big investors are seeing towards your ESG reports if you are attracting investment or if you are creating something. So two quick points now. Coming back and focusing on CBAM needs to be again seen from the climate finance perspective, like what is happening. So in my research, I coined out this concept, which is reverse climate finance, which is actually going to happen if the CBAM is applied in the state which is introduced right now. Reverse climate finance is basically the finance going from developing countries to developed countries for their climate goals, which is perfectly fine. You reach out, like you cover your climate goals, but you have to make your own efforts. You cannot do it on the cost of developing countries and taking money out of them, which is happening, and which developed countries has also, I cannot name, but I've been meeting some policy makers. They said, yeah, this is one of the issues with CBAM, and we need to now, this reverse climate finance can be very easily channelized into a I would say capacity building or a technical assistance program. Even if we leave the CCTS credit scheme or whatever internal carbon pricing scheme, that climate finance could be easily used for helping out the industries in developing countries or the countries facing these issues in terms of decarbonization. So policymakers need to sit, and there, as we said in the starting, there's a lot of research and thoughtful discussions are important and needed for navigating these issues. Otherwise, if we just do the blame game, this is going to be a real big problem for both the developed and the developing world, and it will disrupt trade on already not very amazingly performing the WTO DSS system. So we cannot like afford this, and we need to solve it out. And also, as you mentioned, Dr. Rao, about my firm Climatability, what we are trying to do is, especially for Indian industries, we have come up with this, and we are in the process of making it a platform. The short is Camry. I forgot the detailed version, but it's like a platform where we are giving real-time updates for any CBAM compliances that will come for countries, specifically Indian industries, and like how much tax you need to pay. As Sharat said in the starting, if any tax comes into the picture, like GST, it's to understand the compliance, how to go about it. It's a big issue, and especially when it comes from a different country, from a different block, we need to understand that. And with the help of our in-house experts, we are creating this platform which will help not only big industries but also MSMEs to just log in their data, and everything will be there on the screens.
So I think, and just to give a little bit of a data behind what he was mentioning as reverse climate financing. So according to some studies already, they say that what is assessed is that CBAM regulations, or CBAM as a tax, is going to fetch annually the EU an added income of say about $1.5 billion approximately.
Exactly.
And the idea for the reverse climate financing then is that so that $1.5 billion earned by the EU should be sort of given back or channeled back
Yeah.
to the countries because of the reasons that Dr. Bharadwaj just elaborated upon. So this is just to give you an idea of what the estimations are. And 1.5 to $2 billion is not really not a small money,
Exactly.
especially when you talk about that money getting channeled back to say the MSMEs or something. I
No,
think that's
absolutely.
yeah.
In
that's
terms
good
of
one.
GDP, I would say there's a very good robust study done by one of the think tanks in India. 0.5% of the Indian GDP will be affected if CBAM is applied the way it is right now, like
Okay.
if it's not negotiated.
Sharat, what about your solutions? How do we take the conversation forward?
Again, I think Dr. Bhardwaj,
Yeah.
he mentioned a very important point which I would like to stress, which is the dispute resolution system.
Right.
And that's part of our these larger FTA talks as well, a bilateral investment treaty.
Yes, absolutely.
Within that, dispute resolution is a key point. So India, a few years ago, we cancelled all of our bilateral investment treaties, right?
Yes.
Six
And
of
this
Yeah.
spooked a lot of investors because now what those treaties were giving was protection that if there is a dispute, arbitration will happen in a third country. They don't really trust it over here that, if the arbitration happens here, then a high court or a district court, whether it will rule against the Indian party and rule in favor of the foreign party, they don't trust it to be fair.
Yeah.
And so they want it to happen in a third country. So again, we need to build this trust back again that our arbitration system is fast, fair, and effective.
Yeah.
And I think fast is as important to happen as fair.
Yeah.
Because
Justice delayed is justice denied.
absolutely, if a company's investments are tied up in litigation for 10 years, that's a huge cost to these companies. So, yeah.
And I think that also somewhere highlights why looking at the three different verticals of what we are negotiating with the EU are actually not watertight compartments.
Yeah.
So if there is a FTA on goods and services and there is a problem regarding CBAM, you cannot really completely detach it from the bilateral investment treaty because of all the investments that we were just talking about, which the CBAM would impact, and ultimately because of the investment protection, their insistence on investment protection again cannot be completely divorced from what kind of an investment ecosystem do we have here when we are getting into these kind of guarantees that we don't want to give and they want to have, right?
Absolutely.
So these things cannot be understood in complete silos. They are different verticals. They can come, ahead of each other maybe, but they cannot be completely broken down into watertight compartments. The developments in one are going to impact the developments in two, and that is the reason why you see that there has been so many years and rounds of negotiation. But and just this brings me to the last point. So the purpose of this show, the print worldview, is also to sort of add to the existing debate. As you may have noticed, that we really got into the nitty gritty of what really is this discussion all about, etc. And we also try to get experts who have really studied this particular subject in length. Now, what are your recommendations, Dr. Manoj? Because the one part is that if, for all the viewers that are watching it, of course, this is not a one-off discussion. We are going to have more discussions with more, stakeholders and policy makers, etc. But right now, what are the recommendations that you would give to the viewers? What kind of handles to watch out for? What are the right reports to watch out for? Because a lot of times the data can also get very conflicting, right, and get mired into political narratives. So if you really want to understand that, what kind of books to read?
Especially the literature that we need to read has to be data driven, has to point out the problems and also to give the solutions. So firstly, I would recommend that the book, my book that is coming out, it's very robust because it's a part of my dissertation and it's very detailed. And so you can read that book. It will be out soon in 3 to 4 months. Apart from that, I would suggest viewers to reach out to an organization, a forum which is known as Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs. It's based out of Graduate Institute Geneva, which works very robustly with WTO on and the issues related to the section of trade and climate change and environment. For Indian think tanks, I would say, or Indian research, I would say CSE, Center for Science and Environment, their climate change program has done great research on that. and also GTRI.
Yes.
It's been very vocal, and the data is simply amazing. So these three, and apart from that, I mean, WTO's repository is there. UNCTAD is coming out up with reports. They have recently done a report on climate finance, and there is the most important report I think the viewers and interested people should read is five intergovernmental body report that has been steered by WTO and World Bank, IMF, OECD, UNCTAD, and WTO. All these five organizations has put up their experts to work on carbon pricing, and there is a specific section on CBAM. So that would be really interesting for people to read and understand this issue.
That is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure this really helps people who are preparing for these competitive exams. For example, by the way, Dr. Manoj is also a research fellow with the WTO, and I think he's also instrumental in putting together a lot of that primary data. Sharat?
So
What do
I'm
you
going
think?
to give you the perspective from a journalist's and
Absolutely, yes.
how
Yeah,
we
yeah.
go about
We are,
doing this
we are trying
research.
to create the perfect synergy here.
Right.
Yes.
So I mean, see, UNCTAD and
Yes.
WTO are absolutely fantastic resources. They not only have the data, but they also do the analysis. They come out with periodic reports, and they're written very simply. And the
Yeah.
thing is that as journalists, we aren't as deeply embedded in any one subject as say Dr. Bharadwaj is.
Yeah.
I mean, a PhD level knowledge we might not have, but these reports then they are written in a way that even we can understand quite a lot of the details. They're written quite simply. But apart from that, there are a lot of the news.
And I think today's audience is also very intelligent. They are
Absolutely.
always on a lookout for something which is more authentic.
That's
So
not
I think-
talking down
yeah,
to them,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of building them up to
Of
that,
course,
that
yeah.
level.
No, I think as these discussions, they need to sort of scale up, because I think the common audience today is really intelligent.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another thing.
And
So
just to plug
UNCTAD,
the Print's audience is
the Print's audience, especially.
Absolutely.
All right.
intelligent.
Okay. So you said UNCTAD and WTO, right?
Yes,
So that to
and-
watch out for. Yeah.
And then apart from that, there are several newsletters, but there's one that repeatedly catches my eye is this one called India Briefing.
Yeah.
By Desan Shira and Associates. So basically, it's a business consultancy.
Okay.
I had subscribed to it way back when and completely forgot about it. But then recently, each of their editions has been very detailed, very well researched, and it's added to the conversation and provided context. So I found that very useful, especially because it comes out periodically.
Sure.
And if you sign up to it, it'll come into your email address in your mailbox as well. You don't have to go look for it. Then the Observer Research Foundation,
ORF.
ORF,
Yeah.
I think they're doing great work.
Yeah.
And they have these Raisina dialogues, and there periodically they'll have these experts who come, and then on the website they'll have the full transcript of what they've said,
Yeah.
or they'll make it into a report. And these are also really, really instructive, because these experts might not write their own reports and publish them, but what they say is nevertheless crucial and important.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. No. Yeah. So, no, please, you can.
no,
you
that
can
and
complete your point.
and you say handles. Now I feel
Yeah.
that the Commerce Ministry, its X handle or formerly Twitter handle, it's very good in that
Yeah.
it keeps updating itself about what the Commerce Minister has been saying, and our Commerce Minister is also quite vocal. He's quite outspoken.
Yes. Of
And
course.
so it's a very useful resource to see what India's current position on any given trade issue is, which also includes, of course, the FTA negotiations and CBAM and things like that. So I'd highly recommend following that handle as
And
well.
adding to that, like a subsidiary of that handle would be another X handle, which is the uh, Indian permanent mission to WTO, because then you get like the real insights, what's happening at WTO, and not just the CBAM issues, but all environmental, climate change related issues and all the other issues. So,
Because there are often differences, I would not say complete discrepancies, but also differences in how, say, a government would address its domestic audience versus what the government is doing when it is at that real negotiation. That, you would agree, was a fantastic discussion with our experts. And with this, we have come to my top 5 takeaways. The first is CBAM is a work in progress, which will be adopted by most developed countries as a principle of international trade. In that sense, preventing carbon leakage is indispensable for building sustainable and decarbonized supply chains. Second, A word of caution. Indian industry that is really at risk are the MSMEs and not the big businesses. For strengthening their green transition, the concept of Dr. Bharadwaj's reverse climate financing is quite constructive, which in principle is urging the developed world to reroute the revenue earned through CBAM back into the MSMEs of the developing world to ensure a more level playing field. Third, genuine fears around double taxation need to be addressed and the misinformation needs to be eliminated. A transparent discussion on India's CCTS scheme will help align this conversation more productively. A key point of discussion here has been the carbon credits, which need to be understood from the perspective of climate financing and enabling green investments into India, and not merely about passing the buck on emission responsibility. The fourth takeaway is that there is no getting away from the fact that India will need to work on its investment regulatory bottlenecks and strengthening investment protection guarantees to really utilize the China Plus One diversification, which we are not doing presently. And finally, the fifth takeaway is that CBAM also presents an opportunity to talk to each other and to other stakeholders, because sustainable supply chains are the future. It makes sense to study the recently concluded FTAs of the EU with, for example, the Mercosur bloc, since it addresses the hesitations as well as the aspirations of developing countries and especially a fellow BRICS member, and here I mean Brazil. The link to all the publications, the X handles and reports we discussed are given in the description box. This is one among other in-depth discussions on India's global trade. The next one will follow soon with real policymakers and stakeholders. Stay tuned.